All right, back with the WMAY morning news feed, getting closer to Thanksgiving. It's 7:12 now. Let's connect with Decatur Republican State Representative Dan Caulkins. He joins us here on the WMAY morning news feed. Representative, thanks for taking time with us this morning. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.
Thank you very much. Hope that you and your family have a good gathering this Thursday.
We're planning on it.
All your listeners.
Yeah, and getting all that Christmas shopping done. It's definitely going to be a busy holiday after what we've experienced over the past 20 months. Dan, let's talk about nursing homes. You're from that space, and this is something that we've seen highlighted throughout the pandemic. Now we've seen some reports come out about how the state handled long-term care facility oversight. Earlier on in the pandemic, there were a couple of people within the Pritzker administration that were relieved of their duties because of not providing the proper oversight over nursing homes. We've got a new report out that shows some other problems and how the state was overseeing nursing homes. As somebody who comes from that industry, and you're now a state representative, I'm sure you hear it from all sides. What's your assessment of the handling of the pandemic by the state when it comes to long-term care settings, which is where we really see the most impact from COVID-19?
Well, that was a huge issue. Probably not as bad today because of the vaccinations. I think almost every resident in a nursing home setting has been vaccinated. But early on, the governor failed miserably to protect our senior citizens. Our nursing homes weren't prepared for this type of an event. It was well beyond anything that anyone had ever really fully trained for in the nursing home industry. Although the Department of Public Health and the local health departments were, they were trained. They had the manual. They knew what they were supposed to do. Unfortunately, instead of letting the local health departments deal with it, Governor Pritzker tasked his administration with taking charge and overruling or micromanaging, whatever you want to call it, the local health departments, which led to a lot of, I think, unnecessary deaths in nursing homes. They also failed to use their infectious control people. The employees stayed home. I mean, they just went home and stayed home instead of going out and doing their job. We asked nurses and doctors and firemen and policemen and employees, employees in nursing homes to go to work every day. And yet the governor allowed our state employees who were trained in infection control and they allowed them to stay home and probably forced them to stay home in some cases. So there's a lot of, I think, culpability here on the part of the Pritzker administration for the all of the deaths that we suffered in our citizens. And you go to LaSalle, to the veterans home, we've asked and asked and asked, and now I think the General Assembly has demanded a recounting of what happened there. We had a political appointee running that facility, and they were not given the equipment they needed. They were not put under lockdowns as quickly as they should have been.
And Representative, your phone is slightly digitizing a little bit. I don't know if you can get closer to a window, maybe, but
let me step outside and see if this is any better.
Yeah, and we're talking with State Representative Dan Caulkins here at 7:15 on the WMAY morning news feed. I'm Greg Bishop, and he's recounting just how we've come to where we are now with nursing home situations and the LaSalle the LaSalle Veterans Home situation where you had several dozen veterans die over the span of several weeks. And all of the questions about why not have even more oversight of nursing homes across the state. Because, Representative, we had nearly one of every other COVID death in a long-term care facility in Illinois.
Yes, and it was predictable. I predicted it. I talked about it in meetings, in caucus gatherings. I talked about it in public, that this was a very predictable and preventable occurrence. But our professionals, the state professionals, the infectious disease control people, stayed home. We didn't, we had a nursing home here who had one of the early outbreaks. PPE was not available. Hospitals were donating masks and gowns to help this facility try to control that outbreak. The state was poorly prepared and terribly, I think, irresponsible in its response.
Representative, a couple of the other issues I want to touch base with you on. We'll stick with COVID-related because the Bureau of Economic Analysis for the federal government put out a report highlighting all of the states' GDP for 2020. And, they put out, of course, the national GDP, and it's obvious that last year was just not a good year at all because of the government-issued shutdown orders and so on. And kids staying home from school and a variety of other things for months on end. But what was fascinating about this report from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, it showed that Illinois' GDP dropped in 2020 by 5.1%, but personal income in 2020 grew by 5.8%. What drove that was a 40+% increase in unemployment. And we've got some other unemployment news of changing, how they're going about paying out. We still don't know exactly how much fraud there was in unemployment. What's your take on, the GDP declining quite a bit, 5%, but yet personal income increasing, driven by a 40+% increase in unemployment when we still don't know what the fraud levels were?
Well, let's talk about GDP first. Obviously, when this COVID hit, we didn't know what the effects were going to be, and so we shut down Illinois for 2 weeks to bend the curve. And the governor refused to bring the General Assembly back to help solve some of these issues. I think we could have done a better job, as we talked about earlier, with nursing homes and other issues. But the governor's continued to lock down and mandates and so obviously our GDP was going to decline significantly. And, it's because we were locked down. Look at Florida. I don't know what the number is, but I'll bet it isn't anywhere close to how bad Illinois was in 2020. So there's why our GDP declined. The unemployment is not also is not a surprise. We're about $5 billion in debt to the unemployment fund. We've paid unemployment. This is just Illinois' share, not the federal share. So our economy last year in 2020 was dependent on unemployment checks, and the state couldn't even get the money out on time. I mean, it's mind-boggling, how that happened. That much money did get back into our economy. As far as the fraud, Illinois Department of Employment Security hasn't released. They won't release. We've asked them to release the numbers. They claim they're still trying to figure it out. I think it's massive, but Illinois wasn't the only target. States all across the country were targeted because of the lack of security, old equipment, the political, implications of not just giving anybody money out that asks for it. The thing that kind of intrigues me is, how can all these fraudsters get paid when people with legitimate claims had trouble getting through IDES to get their claims processed? I mean, that's the weird part of it.
Just for your edification, Florida's GDP was down about 2.8% versus Illinois' 5.1% from last year.
That's tourism. I mean, that's based on tourism. They're a huge tourism state. You would have thought that they would have suffered greatly because people weren't traveling. But but just I think that's a testimony to the way Florida handled COVID.
Representative, that's all the time we've got. We were going to talk a little bit about the legislative maps, but we'll have to connect on that again in the future. There's a lot of time before the June primary and also the November 22 election, but we also have these legislative maps that the courts still have to determine what happens, and we could have an update on that in a week and a half or so. Greatly appreciate your time this morning. Happy Thanksgiving. We'll talk soon, okay?
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to all your listeners.
It is the WMAY morning news feed now 7:22, and your forecast.